A new transfer portal target emerges for Miami at receiver. An old portal target has come off the board, and the Hurricanes are now one spot closer to being under the 85 scholarship limit.
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
The transfer portal news never stops, and neither do we here on Locked On Canes. I am Alex Donno, your host. I'm a University of Miami alumnus, longtime South Florida sports radio vet, and also host of Locked On ACC. Thank you so much to the everydayers for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. I think the only portal that's busier than the LinkedIn Jobs portal is the college football transfer portal. So, made it official on Saturday. Top wide receiver at Arizona State. This is one of the better wide receivers in the country. Elijhah Badger has entered the portal. Now, Mr. Badger this past season recorded 65 receptions for 713 yards and 3 touchdowns. According to CaneSport, this is someone who is emerging on Miami's radar. There have been other wide receivers we've talked about, including another one in Sam Brown out of Houston that I really like. But Elijhah Badger definitely puts himself near the top of that list. I'm sure it's not only Miami that's going to be interested in Badger. Still very fresh on him entering the portal, so we'll be gathering among the next few days which other teams are going to be going hard at this player. But Miami is reportedly looking to try and set up a visit with him. Now, we're going to talk a lot about Elijhah Badger and a few others on this episode of Locked On Canes. But before I start talking about this Arizona State receiver, let me allow someone who covers Arizona State to talk about it. Here's Richie Bradshaw from Locked On Sun Devils.
Elijhah Badger has entered the transfer portal. I'm Richie Bradshaw with the Locked On Sun Devils. Badger was a former 4-star receiver coming out of Sacramento, California in the 2020 recruiting cycle and has turned himself into a household name in Tempe over the last 2 seasons. Badger has accumulated over 1,500 receiving yards on 135 catches with 10 touchdowns over the last 2 years. The 6'2", 190-pound receiver is a do-it-all player and a big play waiting to happen. What will your program be getting with Badger? The redshirt senior is a polished route runner with good speed and can step into a role with your team as a number 1 receiver. Badger is a future NFL prospect and will transform your offense into a dynamic one. If you're in need of a true top dog out wide, then Badger is your.
So we told you, and I still strongly believe this to be the case, if Miami's going to look at adding a receiver in this portal, so you think about the landscape, you're going to have very few roster spots to work with. Miami still is over the scholarship limit right now. We'll get to more on what that is and what that means in a moment, okay? You've also got a lot of talent at that position. So I would only add a receiver if you're adding a proven difference maker. If you're adding somebody who can either walk right into your starting lineup, Miami starts 3 receivers, or someone who at the very least is going to be a top 4 guy, first rotational guy, someone who can add proven production and veteran leadership, that sort of thing. I'm not just looking to add a guy here. I'm not looking to add a jag. I'm looking to add a proven difference maker. And I do think that a guy like Elijhah Badger, if you can get him here, could be someone who checks off that box. He really stepped up in the bigger games that Arizona State played over the past couple of years. ASU's biggest win, they call it their signature win last year, was against UCLA, and Badger had 12 catches for 116 yards and a touchdown in that game. Another big game, just based on the opponent you were going on, because everyone was watching Colorado last year. Not to say Colorado had a very good defense, but every time Colorado was on TV, America was watching Coach Prime last year. Against Colorado, Elijhah Badger had a huge game. 12 catches for 134 yards. And now something that makes Badger extra interesting, when you think about the history of certain beloved players that have put on the Miami uniforms in the past, right? I mean, you go back to a guy like Santana Moss, great wide receiver, absolute stud of a kick and punt returner, right? I mean, Devin Hester made a great living in the NFL as the best returner of all time going into the Hall of Fame, right? Duke Johnson was an amazing returner. That's another box that Elijhah Badger checks off. He's not only an excellent receiver, like someone who's been a number one the last couple of years at Arizona State, whether he would be, I don't know if he'd be a number one at Miami, but he could be, in that conversation in a lot of teams around the country. But what makes this one extra interesting is he's got very high-end talent as a kick returner. Badger last year, he returned 20 kicks for 578 yards, including an 81-yard return last year. So that's another element that he had. So if this is a player that Miami is looking to set up a visit with, and I'm sure Cam Ward is going to be in on his recruitment, Elijhah Badger could be one to watch. Now, speaking of receivers, someone that we already really like here on Locked On Canes, who had very similar production and numbers to what Badger did last year, and that's Sam Brown from Houston. And folks, another reason why you would definitely have Sam Brown on your radar if you're a Miami fan is he's been working out with Cam Ward. I mean, they've got the common geography, Ward being from Texas and Brown being a Texas guy, but they were working out over the weekend. So there's already, whether it actually leads to Brown finding his way to Coral Gables or not, there's already a relationship behind the scenes between Cam Ward and Sam Brown from Houston. Sam Brown, 6'2", 295 pounds. He had 62 catches for 815 yards and 3 touchdowns last year. Yeah, I would say Badger has the more history of being the alpha on his team, where Brown, especially in 2022, was definitely like kind of the number 2 or the periphery guy behind Tank Dell, took more of a leading role on this past year at Houston, but similar attributes, similar production. And, we'll see if Miami ends up trending with one of the two. I definitely don't think you're going to bring in 2 guys at wide receiver, but if you could potentially find a difference maker like that, it would be interesting. Now, a prominent defensive back transfer has officially set up a Miami Hurricanes visit. And this is one that has a lot of history to certain members of Miami's coaching staff. We're going to talk about Dyoni Hill in a moment. And again, the transfer portal can giveth, but it can also taketh away. Miami is losing Kaleb Spencer. We'll talk about the impact of that and what that means when we come back. You know what you want to do, my friends? It's a Sunday. We're only getting started on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. Keep it locked. And if you're a small business owner, you're only getting started with LinkedIn Jobs. Because when you're hiring, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you find professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Thank you so much for making this Sunday episode of Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. Folks, later on in this episode, I do want to talk some Canes baseball because they are on the type of skid. 10 straight losses in the ACC. I cannot ignore it. So later on in this episode, we're going to call upon our baseball correspondent, Raymond Bourg, who has been tracking the Canes baseball team all season long through the good times and the unfortunately many, many bad times. So we will talk with Raymond in a little bit. But folks, if you want to be a Locked On Canes insider, I want to talk to you there. Click the link in the show description below. Try it free for 14 days. When you become a Locked On Canes insider, you're getting text messages directly from my phone to yours with transfer portal scoops, my wacky, sometimes awesome opinions on there, breaking news, all that sort of stuff. So click the link in the show description below to become a Locked On Canes insider. And then if you like it, after 14 days, you can opt in for $4.99 a month, but try it free for 14 days. Become a Locked On Canes insider. So here's a visit that has been scheduled. Dyoni Hill, Marshall cornerback in the transfer portal. He's going to be visiting Miami on April 26th. That happens to be the same weekend that running back Damien Martinez is visiting. So hopefully Mario Cristobal is going to have the loafers on. The loafers are going to be shined. I don't think he wears the type that have laces, so he doesn't have to worry about tripping or anything like that. Just have those loafers looking beautiful out there, Mario, because that's going to be a big, important closing weekend for Miami from April 26th to April 28th. So it's not just Damien Martinez visiting then. Dyoni Hill is also going to visit. 6 foot tall, 172-pound cornerback, started 9 games last year for the Marshall Thundering Herd. Arguably his best game, which is nice to know, came against NC State, although Miami does not have NC State on the schedule this year. It is an ACC opponent, a common opponent from last season, and a team that things work out a certain way. You could, possibly see them in the ACC championship game. Obviously, a few other teams would have something to say about that. But Dyoni Hill is someone who had a really good season at Marshall. Very good in coverage, but excellent as a tackler. Stellar against the run. Tackling grade was 84.1 according to Pro Football Focus. The grade against the run, I believe, was an 84.6, which is elite stuff. And probably most importantly, and this is why this player is not just on Miami's radar, but firmly on Miami's radar, is the common coaching. So this past season, Dyoni Hill's defensive backs coach, his cornerbacks coach, was Chevis Jackson, who's now at Miami. 2 seasons ago in 2022, and he was on the team then playing a role, his defensive coordinator, Lance Guidry, now at Miami. So it's an opportunity for Hill to reunite with both. And, obviously you look at it from the perspective of Coach Guidry and Coach Jackson. They know exactly what this player is capable of doing. So the scouting gets a lot easier. And if they sign off to Mario Cristobal, this is a guy that we think can thrive in our defense. Cristobal is pretty likely to take them at their word because nobody knows more about Dyoni Hill than his most recent cornerbacks coach and one of his recent defensive coordinators. And then also, if Hill were to pick Miami, you'd figure it's going to be a pretty smooth transition for him. Now, obviously, smooth can get a little bit bumpy because the step up from the types of opponents you'd face at Marshall versus the types of opponents and teammates you'd face in practice at Miami, that standard is going to go up. We talked with Elijah Alston about that on a recent episode. We interviewed Elijah, who's transferred defensive end at Miami out of Marshall. So there's obviously a step up in competition, but Dyoni Hill knows the defense. He knows exactly what his cornerbacks coach would expect. So you'd think it'd be a pretty smooth transition there. So this is a player that Miami is seemingly very interested in. Obviously, this is not the only cornerback that I like. I'm also a big fan of Anthony Johnson Jr. from Western Kentucky. We covered him on a recent episode, but Dyoni Hill has just set up an official visit with the Miami Hurricanes. So that's a defensive back Miami is potentially looking to bring in. The Hurricanes did lose somebody over the weekend. Now, if you follow a lot of Florida State and Florida fans on social media, they're trying to tell you that, oh my, one of the best players on the Miami Hurricanes is Mario can't keep his team together. Kaleb Spencer is entering the port. Nice player, Kaleb Spencer, but let's be real here. It's not like Miami's losing a starter or even a second teamer. I wish Spencer all the best. For those who have been following Locked On Canes since the beginning, we've been doing this for a little over 2 years on the Locked On Podcast Network. Kaleb Spencer was somebody that we followed even before he arrived at Miami. We were covering his recruitment. We covered his commitment to the University of Miami, however long ago it was, about a year and a half ago. And I remember watching Spencer in his first spring and his first fall camp at Miami a year ago, and I was really impressed with his physicality coming out of high school. So I have no doubt this guy could end up being a really good player somewhere. But the bottom line with Spencer was he was not trending to be in Miami's rotation this year at safety. He was actually working a lot at linebacker during spring. He was not trending to be part of that linebacker rotation either. Now, this is someone who did have some impact on special teams last year. That's actually the reason why he's only got 3 years of eligibility left, because he played so much on special teams that he wasn't able to use a red shirt this past year. So he was a guy who did have some impact on special teams. So perhaps Miami will miss that. But folks, when we're talking about this, and it can be a cruel world out there when you're talking about the way that rosters get built today in college football. when you're talking about a lot of movement, a lot of transfers, try to get under these roster limits. And, when you're a Miami fan and you're thinking about, okay, we have to lose X amount of players in order to get under 85 to be able to add a couple of players and be roster compliant, which you have to be come August. These are the sorts of players that you'd obviously rather lose a guy who's not trending to be a starter or a rotational player rather than lose somebody who you thought, my goodness, this guy was going to be an important starter impact guy next year. So that softens the blow a little bit, but I wish Kaleb Spencer all the best wherever he finds a home. And so in losing Spencer, Miami is now one spot over the scholarship limit of 85. Now, when I say that, I am including, because officially Miami is like 9 under, but that doesn't include the freshmen that are going to be enrolling in June, that they're not officially on scholarship until they enroll this summer. But once those 10 remaining freshmen enroll, Miami would be at 86. So they still need to trim a few spots, but you folks remember when the transfer portal began, we were talking about Miami being 6 or 7 spots over the roster limit. The Hurricanes are now at 86, so they're still just 1 spot over. There are going to be a few more players who leave. Inevitably, we'll be tracking that over the next couple of weeks. Now, an important distinction I want to make, because a couple people have asked me about this. Well, when we're talking about guys like Dyoni Hill and Damien Martinez visiting Miami within the next week, people asking, so Miami can't actually add those guys until you get under. Is that right? That's not right. Miami does not have to be compliant under 80 at or under 85 until, I believe, around the time that fall camp starts, or around early August. So technically, next week, you can accept a commitment from a Damien Martinez. If he decides to do that, you can accept a commitment from Dyoni Hill. Even if that were to hypothetically put you over the scholarship limit for now, you don't have to be at or under that scholarship limit yet. So Miami does not yet have to be roster compliant, but of course, planning has to go into setting that up. So I do expect, and I don't exactly know who, but I do expect Miami is going to see a few more players exit within the coming days. And again, we'll be tracking that religiously here on Locked On Canes. Anytime something happens, we will be with you right here on this podcast. So here's a development of a player, and I know some Hurricanes fans will probably be a little bit relieved that this player is off the board now. We had talked a lot over the last few weeks about defensive end Romello Height in the transfer portal from USC. He did during spring football a couple of weeks ago. He took a visit to Miami. Some had thought Height might even be trending in Miami's direction. I think Miami cooled off on him a little bit. And Height, as of last night, Saturday night, he's committed to Georgia Tech. So Romelo Height, no longer an option for Miami. And again, very polarizing among the fan base. A lot of folks out there didn't like the way that, he burned Miami a few years ago coming out of high school. That was the Manny Diaz staff, not the Mario Cristobal staff, but he did embarrass us a little bit when he flipped to Auburn on signing day, ended up transferring to USC. But I think with Height committing to Georgia Tech, I feel like this player could have been a Miami Hurricane if Miami had wanted to play it that way. I think Miami has their sights set elsewhere in using their, thin available scholarships. This guy could have been a solid veteran rotation player, probably not a high impact guy, but a guy who would definitely raise the floor of your defensive end rotation. But he's not going to be a Hurricane. He's headed to Georgia Tech. So I know Miami fans had mixed feelings about this one. He's not going to be a Hurricane. And guys, I don't talk about this stuff a whole lot because I tend to focus on Miami's program and not trolling other programs or other players and stuff. But I definitely think it's worth bringing up some of the interesting developments out there with guys who are either former Miami players or at least former Miami Hurricanes commits. Like we all remember from a couple recruiting cycles ago, the Jaden Rashada sagas, when he was a Miami commit who flipped to Florida, then Florida screwed him over with his NIL situation. He goes to Arizona State. Jaden Rashada is in the portal. He might end up at Georgia. That's there's some momentum there for the Dogs. But Jaden Rashada, former, high-level 4-star quarterback from a couple of years ago, a lot of drama with his recruitment. He's in the transfer portal. He's leaving Arizona State. We all know about Cormani McClain. We have talked about him a little bit on this podcast. He is in the transfer portal from Colorado. That was a guy who left Miami at the altar in the class of 2023, never signed his national letter of intent. He flipped to Deion Sanders. He's now in the portal. There's even been a little bit of chatter out there that Tyler Van Dyke may not stick at Wisconsin, that his quarterback battle there against Braden Locke, who Wisconsin basically brought Van Dyke in because they didn't have enough confidence in the other guy. Well, the other guy might be beating out Tyler Van Dyke there, and he may end up hitting the portal. That's been a little bit of the buzz up there in Wisconsin. People are wondering if that's going to happen. So there's been crazy movement around there, and people refer to that as the Miami curse, right? Guys who either troll Miami in recruiting, or guys who leave Miami off. Not a hard rule, because I think Colby Young is somebody who may end up doing really well in Georgia. Colby played really well in Georgia's spring game, so there are guys who are immune to the Miami curse, but the Miami curse sometimes claims victims where if you leave Miami's program or if you embarrass Miami during your recruiting process, the football gods do not forget. I just wish we could find a way to make the baseball gods a little bit happy. So we're going to talk about this 10-game ACC losing streak for the Miami Hurricanes on the other side. Our baseball guy, Raymond Bourg, is going to join us when we come back. So you know what you want to do? You want to keep it locked right here to Locked On Canes. And I know you're keeping it locked to FanDuel. Folks, I'm on my way in a second here to the Florida Panthers Tampa Bay Lightning playoff game. And I've got action on my Panthers. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing now. FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. This Miami baseball team, if I had any hair left on my head, it would have all fallen out by now. Maybe we should be focusing more on the Cavender twins being back women's basketball, which I am really excited about. But I want to see this baseball team turn it around. They've dropped 10 straight ACC games. We bring on our baseball guy who's done an awesome job with us, Raymond Bourg. And Raymond, I wish that they were giving you better results to work with. So what's been going wrong? Because Miami's a fun team to watch at times when the bats get going, but they can't hold leads. And right now they can't beat anybody. What's going on?
Yeah, we're in a real hole right now. We've lost, I believe, 10 straight ACC games. Our last victory was against Clemson. I believe that was game 1 or 2. Right now, we're in the middle of another 6-game losing streak. We play Louisville today at 2:00. With Henderson pitching right now, and we've got Louisville undecided. But there's multiple factors. We can't hold a lead. We've got young pitching. A lot of errors. They had 3 errors in the game last night, which is absolutely driving me crazy, especially one with McCoy, a simple second base to first base, overthrows to first baseman. That would have been the second out, I believe. Just horrible playing, not thinking, all going by reaction and emotion. Also being, to me, way over aggressive on the base paths. I like the spirit of it, but I believe it was in the 3rd inning. Louisville's right fielder, Humphrey, has got a cannon for an arm. Surprised Louisville's not looking for him as a quarterback. Drilled it to third, basically drilled it at home and caught him out. Caught him out, and I'm like, there was a run, and it would have still 0-0 at that point in the 3rd inning. But that just seems to be, it's just inexperience. It's some youth. I think it's overthinking things. Maybe they're starting to panic with all these losing streaks. They're young kids. And baseball really is a mental game. And I also started to worry about the pitching coach. Said it last time we spoke, and I'm starting to wonder what JD's doing on some of these swaps on the way he's handling the pitchers. I feel we're at a point now that we may, if they lose to Louisville today, they're coming to Georgia Tech, and they're a little bit better record-wise than Miami. But I'm starting to wonder they're just going to not really throw in the towel and quit, but they're just going to play the young kids. Another main issue is Blake Sire's been injured. He's only, I think he's missed at least the last 6 or 7 games. I've been trying to find an injury report on him with no real luck of what's going on, but he's Basically he's only played 25 games out of 38. And that's not good. Sire was really on his way to being the MVP, I thought, of the team.
All right. So what would you mention, given the young kids more, how does the pipeline look in terms of, and would it be important to give some of the young kids more playing time if you're out of the, we'll talk about the postseason picture in a minute, but to try to keep the future looking bright if the present doesn't look bright?
I think basically they need to get these kids out there. I think the juniors and the seniors are having not great years. Zeal, Schlesinger, their best ERA is around 4. They're a combined record of 4 and 6. No one thought about at the beginning of the season. Each had 10 starts. I just think start working on the kids. Let's see what they have. Develop their pitches. Get them used to the college game and the college speed. And maybe start focusing toward next year, but also want to keep these kids there. My fear is transfer. Is a lot of these players are transferring out. Florida State's a great example. They brought in so much talent. I mean, everyone thought Florida State was going to be one of the worst teams in the ACC. They were last year. Here they are. They're probably going to win the ACC regular season and potentially the tournament the way things are going. And they swept Miami. And that last game they just really took it to Miami, and they look really solid. My God, they beat the Gators,
Yeah.
And they're a good team. And so it's very that they're going to have to get more. They're going to have to get the kids to see what they got, and they've got to find a way to keeping them. It's a new game now, the transfer rules, and it's only going to get wilder with the automatic eligibility.
So, Raymond, what is Miami's postseason outlook in baseball when it comes to ACC tournament seeding and what it's going to take to see this team extend their season?
Yeah, well, basically, what right now they are floating between, I will say, the bottom seed, which is the 12th to up to 9th. We've got Notre Dame with a conference record of 4-16. Miami's 6-14 right now. Pitt is 5-16. So we're looking at the bottom 3 right now as it stands. But now we're going to start playing. We're going to play Pitt in 3. We're playing Tech next week. We got Va Tech, but they're 12-8. So this tournament. They'll make the tournament. It's not like a certain number of teams in like the larger basketball conferences, 12, 16, whatever the case may be. They all make it. All 12 teams make it, and they go into those pods. They'll make it, but I just don't see them getting out of it. And not just I just see no tournament possibility this year, unless by a miracle. Because we already, in the Baseball America of the last several weeks, they've been out of the projected 64.
Wow. Well, I hope that miracle can start at the light later today. What should fans expect at 2:00 when Miami looks to at least get a game from Louisville after dropping the first 2?
I think it's just a mental game right now. Hernandez is like he's going to be pitching. The batters are kind of hitting, but they got to stay clutch. But if the relief falls apart again, it's the same old song and dance the last several games. Unless maybe we get the Cookie Monster out there, maybe he can throw some balls from behind home plate. If you've seen that gentleman, if you watched last night, you saw Mrs. Cookie Monster too. She was there as well, not in costume now. That's what I expect. But I also see Louisville sees blood, and Louisville wants to get this sweep, and that's a great way to start getting toward the tail end of the season, getting ready for the ACC tournament, and eventually the NCAA tournament.
Well, Raymond, shout out and thank you as always for the content, and hopefully the next time we chat, we're chatting after some wins. Raymond Bourg. Awesome job, sir. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
Thank you.
We will talk to everyone again next time on another episode of Locked On Canes. We are part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.